Dear Lord, how wonderful it is that we can listen to you and be filled with this singing heart, this river of joy, this river of life. And so we thank you and praise your name, and we know that you will be with us this morning and all that we need. In Jesus' blessed name, amen. As I walked over last night from the broadcast to the that's just a little gremlin there, see? From the broadcast to the prayer room, I had two of these little vigil lights in my hands, as many as the rest of you did. And when I arrived over there, I had one that was lighted instead of two. But as long as I had that light, I was able to not only relight the one that had been blown out, but I was able to light several others that had been blown out. And yet if that light had gone out, that other light, why, I then would have had to go to some other source to get lighted again. And I thought at the time, well, now, how like to this whole matter of the Spirit this is. We have to have that light. And Christ gives us that light. And our job is to keep it burning, to keep it. And as we go out, just as last night we went out from this sheltered place up there in the chapel, and the winds of life begin to come along. My goodness, they were very mild last night, but because this was a very tiny light, it got blown out. And but when we go out into the winds of life, there are so many people in the camps that they get blown out. But first of all, it is very easy to light it if you light it again quickly. Now, when one of these others that had been blown out turned immediately to the light, why, it was almost as though the light just ran up there, and because you see there was still I suppose the gases that were ascending a little bit there, making a path. And I couldn't help but think of what Jesus says about be quick and come to terms with your opponent whilst you're in the way with him. Because if you delay, and that's what Irene was mentioning here the other day about when this burning oil poured on her hand. Now, if she was real quick about it, you see, and turning to God, why then everything was all right. And so we have that in mind. But any time this light begins to flicker or go down, all right, be quick and get back on the beam. I remember one time when I got off and realized I was off, and what made me realize it was that something happened that revealed it. Otherwise, I would not have been aware that I was off. And that is strange to say. That is sometimes the case, that our light will go out, and we really are not aware of it. I presume it's because we're looking in another direction. And in this case, this incident revealed that my light had gone out, and so I just dropped down on one knee right where I happened to be alone. And I just dropped down on one knee right where I was, and I said, Lord, take this out of my heart, because I knew there was something wrong inside of me. And bingo, it was gone just like that. And I was just in heaven, just as though somebody had catapulted me into heaven, you see. Because the thing that was in the way had been revealed to me, my opponent, had been revealed to me, and I quickly came to terms with it by turning it over to the Lord. Lord, take this out of my heart. And bingo, there I was. Now, that's a new kind of bingo. It's all right to play that kind of bingo. You just play that kind of bingo all the time. And It'll be all right. So I was just catapulted into heaven. I was all lit up again. Just the way Irene says, if you go home singing these songs, you're all lit up, and that's all right. That's a good way to be there. And well, it made me think also of the wonderful miracle of this whole thing. I remember the story of Sherwood Eddy. Sherwood Eddy was a young man in college, and he was a wealthy young man. His folks had wealth, and he was at Yale. And someone had tried to persuade him to go up to Northfield to hear Dwight L. Moody. And, well, he didn't know. You see, he was pulled one way and then pulled the other way. And he decided a half a dozen times to go, and then he decided a half a dozen times not to go. And oh my goodness, how I see that happening in the camps. When we get here, people, they don't know how about it? I remember Lee Nichols, who said that he arrived at camp and he thought, well, how in the world did I ever arrive here among all these peculiar people? Only he didn't use peculiar. I forget what he did use, but it was pretty strong, and he thought, why, I never was in such a crazy bunch in my life. But something kept him staying there, and after he'd been there about 3 days, he thought, why, where did all these wonderful people come from? Because he'd stayed long enough, you see, to get a little bit of that ignition, a little bit of that light. And, well, now Sherwood Eddy, this privileged young man, decided back and forth, and finally, the train, he'd gone down to the depot, and apparently he got on the train, then he decided he wasn't going to go, and he got off the train. And then the train started up, and just as it started up, he ran after it, and he jumped on the last platform. I love that picture. And so he got up there, and he still, you see, hadn't made up his mind, because here in the first meeting that night, where Dwight L. Moody was to speak, he wasn't sure that he was going to go to the meeting. See? Isn't it strange how we fear these things? It seems strange afterwards. Of course, we've probably all been through it in one way or another. And so finally, he snuck in right at the end and took one of the last seats. And Dwight L. Moody got up to read the scriptures. Now, this I think we ought to get, because first of all, customary education was concerned. I don't know that he even used good English, but at least he used God's English. And so he got up to read the scriptures, and he read this passage about the water the water that you're giving, if you drink, you will thirst again. But the water that I give you, if you drink it, it shall be a well of water, springing up within you into eternal life. I think maybe I can... No, I just said... Yeah, here. It says, Jesus... the Samaritan woman said... Jesus said to the Samaritan woman who had come to draw water, give me a drink. And the Samaritan woman said, what, you, a Jew, and you ask me for a drink? Me, a Samaritan? Well, you see, there's the first place where he had crossed the line that normally divides. Let's remember that when we go out, to cross these lines. Jesus answered, if you knew what is the free gift of God and who is asking you for a drink, you would have asked him instead, and he would have given you living water. Sir, said the woman, you have nothing to draw water with, and it's a deep well. Where do you get your living water? See, she was a rough character, you see. She wasn't going to let anybody kid her. Are you a greater man than Jacob, our ancestor? He gave us this well, and he drank from it with his sons and his cattle. In other words, she's saying, who in the world are you, anyway? Jesus answered, anyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But anyone who water that I shall give him will never thirst any more. The water that I shall give him will turn into a spring of water, welling up to life eternal. And when Dwight L. Moody read that passage, it was probably in a different translation, but that makes no difference, something hit Sherwood Eddy, and he went out from that meeting and wrestled all night in prayer and came through. Now, you see, you can't explain that, can you? You can't, he didn't listen to a sermon, he wasn't argued, it wasn't his mind that did anything of that sort. It was something in Dwight L. Moody that ignited him. He knew it was a reality. That well of water was springing right up within Dwight L. Moody. Now, you know, I sort of feel as though you just ought to look around, we just ought to see that everyone in this camp is, of course, it's the paradox of the kingdom. We've been talking about the well of living water, and we've been talking about our life. Normally they don't go together, do they? But here they do, you see. We just ought to see that everyone in this camp is gushing up living water. Everyone in this camp is lighted up with the light eternal. Now you just turn to your neighbor right now and say, are you lighted? Now you see that thing can just sweep over a whole group. And it may be flickering, but there it is. Well, what I was going to read was about, not about life, but about life. Because that's the way with Jesus. He used any of these symbols. Living water, because he'd asked for a drink. And so he used that living water. Later on, he used the symbol of light. Later on, he used the symbol of bread. And he also used the whole matter of light. And so he says, truly, truly, I tell you, the Son can do nothing of his own accord. Nothing but what he sees the Father doing. Now, what is that Father? Well, there are many ways in which the Father can be revealed to us. It can be revealed to us as this life. It can be revealed to us as love. It can be revealed to us as any of the fruits of the Spirit. But he says, nothing but what he sees the Father doing. For whatever he does, the Son also does the same. Now that's one of the things that the Father loves the Son and shows him all that he is doing himself. He will show him still greater deeds than these to make you wonder. For as the Father raises the dead and makes them live, so the Son makes anyone live whom he chooses. Now some of you folks are dead. Some of us are dead. But the Son can make any one of us live whom he chooses. Now, of course, when we use that term, why, we use it in a little different sense than it's normally used, but to see he sins his dying, I mean, you can think of it in all those different contexts, but here it's a matter of life. And he can make anyone live whom he chooses. And I love the figure of this flame. Well, now to begin with, though,
What is truly, truly, I tell you, the Son can do nothing of his own accord, but only what he sees the Father doing. In other words, we have to stay by that flame, by that light, by that light. And anything that is not of that, we must brush aside. Now, this business of doing things of doing nothing of his own accord, I know that many people have difficulty with that. And I want to give you a little illustration that has been a great help to me. Because you have, maybe I told you folks about the little straw, did I? Well, I told someone about it, but I guess not you folks. A friend came to me one time, and he had been trying to follow God's guidance, but he just always seemed to be frustrated. The plans would never carry through, and yet he felt that God had told him to do these things. And so he came to me to talk to me about it and for help. And the thing that came to me was that maybe the Lord did tell him to do this, but once he told him to do it, he set out to do it himself. And so this illustration came to me. You've probably all heard or seen, maybe, of a little straw that has been driven to a telegraph pole in a hurricane or cyclone or something like that, or to a 2x4. How many of you have seen or known of things like that? Hold up your hand. Sure. Lots of evidence, see. All right, now, I just pictured myself as this little straw. And I'm a religious little straw. And so I pray to the Lord, and I say, now, Lord, I just want to do whatever you want me to do. So the Lord says, all right, I want you to go through that telephone pole. Well, being an obedient little straw, I get up on my forked end, and I waddle over. And I put my head up against that telephone pole, and I begin to push. Well, you know what happened? I just get flat-headed, that's all. Get nowhere, you see. But if instead of that, I say, well, now, Lord, I'm perfectly willing. Now, you see, that willingness is a very essential thing. I'm perfectly willing to go through that telegraph pole. But if I'm going through, you got to put me through, see? And then he sends his wind along, and he picks me up, this little straw, because I'm perfectly willing. I'm not fastened to anything else. And he picks me up, and I go 30 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour, 90 miles an hour. This wind, and I hit that telegraph pole, and bingo. There's bingo again. There I am, right through the telegraph pole. How? Don't ask me. Except the Lord did it. And it was a long time after that illustration came to me before I realized this wonderful thing. That when I was in this wind, traveling 90 miles an hour, I was as much at rest as when I was lying on the ground. Now, I don't know whether that sinks in with you or not. But if we are in the Lord's will, if we have given ourselves over to Him, why, He can do anything that He wants with us. But it is up to Him. The minute I try to take on any responsibility for it, all I do is simply get in the way. Now, you see how so many people say, well, but the Lord helps those who help themselves. Who said so? Who said so? Now, all that thing is getting at is this, that a person who just sits down and does nothing, you see, but that is not a person that's listening to the Lord. The Lord, if the Lord tells you to do something, all right, you go ahead and do it. You obey it. But if you do it in your own strength, that's why it's so significant when Jesus says, I do nothing of my own accord. Nothing but what I see the Father within him doing, you see. Now, you get that into practical life. Well, does it mean you just sit down like a bump on the log and say, now, Father, you tell me what to do? Well, no, I don't think it means that. I think you go about your normal life, but you're listening all the time to that inner voice. And what that inner voice tells you, all right, you test it to make sure that it is that inner voice. And the way in which I find I have to test it is that I have to see if I am perfectly willing to move in any direction or not to move. In other words, suppose there are 2 or 3 alternatives. Well, I have to say, well, am I willing to do this thing? Am I also willing not to do it? Because it took me a long time before I reached the place where I realized that sometimes I might seem to be willing to do a thing, but I was not willing not to do it. Now, have you ever been caught that way? So you see, and that's where this wonderful little prayer of Thomas the Kempist comes in, where he says, and you'll find it quoted in the Song of the Souls of Men, and also in I Will Lift Up Mine Eyes, about, Lord, thou knowest what is the better way. So let everything be done as thou pleasest. Lo, I am in thy hand. Turn me round and turn me back again, even as a wheel. Well, suppose you think about a little weather thing, supposed to show the direction of the wind. Now, that's what we're after, is the direction of the wind of God's will. You see, if it sticks at any point, as it swings around, if it sticks at any point, there will be times when it will not show the direction of God's will. Now, it may show it when God's will happens to be in the direction where it's free. But if it moves around to one of these sticky points, it will not show the direction. Now, that means something to me. I hope it does to you. Because, you see, it means that, yes, I can know what God's will is when it happens to be moving in the direction in which I am released and free. And I can experience God's will and have wonderful experiences. And then, lo and behold, all of a sudden, I begin to run into nothing but trouble, frustration, so forth and so on. Why? Well, because His will, the direction of His will has changed, and has changed over into an area where I am not free and released. See? I had a woman come to me here yesterday, something troubling her, because of something that had been said where she was not free. Now, I say that with confidence because there was a time when I myself was not free in that area, see? And I became free. It took me a long time before I became free in that area. And so I know that when she gets the sense of freedom in that area, that there'll be no trouble there. Now, she's a wonderful woman. And she has no doubt known God's will and His leading in many areas. But when His leading begins to get over in this area, she gets stuck. So turn me round and turn me back again, even as a wheel. And until He can do that, you cannot know for certainty whether it's God's will or not. But when you do that, I remember one time when I wanted to go and do a certain thing. But I didn't have the money to do it. And so I was trying to find God's will for it, and I couldn't get any place. And finally, on the day that I was going to have to know if I did this, I had to leave on a certain day. That morning, it was just as though a voice spoke to me and said, "Look here, son, get clear. You're not released." And then I realized that I wasn't. I was hanging on. So I began to get clear. Well, what did it mean? Well, first of all, it meant this: that if I went, I was going to have to trust him to supply the wherewithal. And that if I didn't, I was going to have to be completely at peace not to go, which I had not been. And so that was where I had to work, to free myself at both of those points, because I was sticking at both of those points. Well, I finally got free, and I had such a wonderful peace, and someone said a little bit later, "Well, Glenn, are you going?" And I said, "I don't know," and I didn't. I had no sense of what I was going on. And then a thought occurred to me, and I thought this: well, now, if I go, I'll have to get the money. There was a certain source from which I had been expecting some money, but just the same, that money didn't belong to that trip. That money belonged to my family and the care of my family. So that was no. But nevertheless, I still had to get that cash, and I had to do. There were a couple of other things. So I thought, well, I hadn't received the money, so I thought I'll call up this man and see. So I called him up on the phone, and he said, "Why, Glenn," he said, "I'm delighted to hear from you. How are you?" and so forth. And I had a nice conversation with him, and then I said, "By the way, could you spare that money that you were going to send me?" "Why, sure," he said, "I'll put it in the mail today." And I said, "Well, that'd be too late." I said, I'll need it today if I'm going to use it. "Well," he said, "let me see. And could you stop out by here?" And yes, but I said I couldn't be there until after 5 o'clock. He says, "Well, the office closes at 5, and let me see." And he turned around to ask his secretary if she'd be there. She said, "Yes, she'll be here a little after 5. All right." "Say," he says, "it's lucky you called me when you did." He says, "I've been out all day, and I just got in." And he said, "I'm going to leave in 5 minutes. I won't be back." So you see, I had been led to call during the 10 minutes of the day that he was there. And so that door opened. So I thought, well, I'll see if the other door's open. Well, each door when I came to just opened. So then I said, "Well, all right, Lord, I guess you want me to go." So I went. Now in going, this person that had written me said he wished that I could come, but he says, "I'm sorry to say I can't guarantee you a penny on your expenses." But after the meeting was over, he pulled me aside and he said, "Glenn, how much do we owe you?" And I said, "Well, you don't owe me anything." He said, "Oh, come on." He says, "I know you don't run around the country this way without any on your own, paying your own way." And I said, "Well, that's true," but I explained to him. I said, when I decided that when the Lord told me it was a thing for me to come, why, I was just resting in, but I said, "You don't owe me anything." And he said, "Well," he said, "you know," he said, "normally we take up an offering that is supposed to cover certain things, and every year it's come out just a certain amount. But," he said, "this year we have so much over." He said, "Now, would that amount help you?" Well, I almost laughed out loud because it was just about to the dollar what my expenses had been. And so there you were, you see. There I was. There the Lord was, I mean. Well, now, those things don't always come out quite so exactly, you see, but the point was, and the only reason for telling this is just because in this instance, you see, I had to free myself at 2 points where I was not free. So when you get back Now, if you're free, then the Lord can tell you his will, and then you do nothing of your own accord. You do it because he says to do it, not because you say to do it, or not because you are afraid to do it, or not anything like that, see? And honestly, I think that thing, thinking, well, now, the Lord told me to do something, so now I got to get over and do it. I got to get all these things and so forth. Suppose I asked you to bring that chair over here because I needed it for some reason or other. And so you started to bring it over, and I immediately rushed over and took hold of it and began to, well, you'd say, well, all right, if you're going to do it, go ahead and do it. Wouldn't you? You see? So, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But, you see, this, now, the reason I say this is because these are the things that blow out the light, you see. The minute we begin to interpose our own will, we get off the beam. Another little thing that I used to love is this life is so easy if you stay on the beam, if you stay in balance. When I was a youngster, I expect you did the same thing. I used to love to walk along a railroad track, see? Well, there's no more wonderful walking in the world as long as you're in balance. And there's nothing any more difficult as long as you're not in balance. You keep falling off all the time, you see, and so forth. Down at Merritt Institute years ago, I still remember Douglas Horton was down there. We had a lot of country preachers in there. And they turned this had been an old college, which now is Merritt Institute, and so they turned the gymnasium into a roller skating rink. They had canned music there, you see, and they put on these roller skates for the kids of the community, but the preachers decided they were going to put on roller skates, you see. And so we all got out there on these roller skates, and some of us hadn't had them on for 10 years, and some 20, and some never, and so forth. Douglas Horton was pretty good, though. And so we began going around there, and after a while I noticed a peculiar thing, that every now and then one person would fall. And every time one person would fall, it seemed like a half a dozen would fall immediately afterwards, you see. And I thought, well, this is strange, and so forth. And after a while, someone right behind me fell. And so what did I do? I looked around like this, and I almost went down, see? And then I realized, you see, that every time one person would fall, a lot of people would take their eyes off of their balance, you see, and then down they went because they weren't used to it, see. Now that's what happens when we take our eyes off of Jesus. And the reason Jesus never fell was because he never took his eyes off of the Heavenly Father. And my goodness, if it was necessary for him, how much more necessary is it for us? Isn't it amazing how we think we're so much better than Jesus is? We don't have to pray all night the way he did. Wasn't it wonderful to have that all night of prayer? And many times these things that we don't realize what's happening, but sometimes I've used this experience that one time I was up at Yerkes Observatory, and they let us look through one of the great telescopes up there, and of course they're synchronized, with the motion of the earth and so forth. And the thing that I remember from that, he said, well, now let me turn off the motor. And so he turned off the motor, and here we had this focused on a certain planet and so forth. And when he turned off the motor, jingle, it just flashed out of that, showing that tremendous motion, you see, the minute the motor was turned off. However, he explained to us, and this was many years ago, and it's commonplace now, but he said, we never look through the telescope anymore. He said, we have this coordinated, and so we put a plate, a photographic plate at the end of it. And consequently, he said, that can be exposed for hours, and we get the picture of, I don't know whether it's millions or certainly thousands, maybe it's millions of stars, that the human eye never sees. Well, now that's what meditation does. Meditation exposes you over a long enough period of time so that things can be brought out that are of God, the light of God, that if you were in a busy life going here and there and so forth and so on, you would never see. You would miss utterly. And that time exposure to God. Now that's, I feel sure that's why Jesus prayed all night. Many times he was getting a clear picture of what God wanted him to do. But we think we can get it in 10 minutes. So forth and so on. Now, of course, I don't mean to deny the fact that it's possible that we can play the game of minutes and be conscious of God all the time. That's what we should do. But nevertheless, even so, there are times when it seems to be necessary to go apart. Now, I want to relate that to this matter of this light blowing out, because the light is the light of men, the light of Christ. And if that blows out, if that faith, if that love, if that hope, if that joy blows out in any way, then we need to get it established again quickly. And so this matter of, now if you're going to light a light again, you don't light it in a wind. You have to find some way of sheltering, of surrounding, of withdrawing, until that thing can be relighted. Now, as we were talking the other day, once the light is lighted, then opposition and the increase of the fuel can help to make it into a torch. But if the torch is blown out, in other words, you see, there's a place for the opposition. But if the torch is blown out, then you have to come back into a place of quietness to get it relighted. And we want our lights to keep on burning. We don't want these things out there to blow them out. And if they keep on burning, if we protect them when needful and then expose them when they need to be exposed until they can become a torch against any opposition and so forth, then we can do God's work, because he is the light. Now, I just hope that when we go out from here tomorrow, and I think that most everyone in the camp now is lighted after this all night of prayer. I just hope that we can keep this thing glowing so that it is going to ignite lives in every community that is represented, and in every area of life. But remember, but it isn't going to do it because you try to do it. I still remember a lady down in Portland, Oregon. I wonder who she was. I don't suppose that she could possibly be in this group. But she was She was in our, Glenn mentioned last night this third front that he and Starr and I went on back in 42, and in the course of that we visited Portland, and we had these meetings there, and in the prayer groups in the afternoon, this woman had caught something. I knew she'd caught something, but she was still worried, because she said, I got a neighbor back there that I just, oh, how I wish I could tell her about these things, but she said, I just can't. She just refuses to listen to me. She refuses to pay any attention to me and so forth. And she said, how am I going to do that? And my only answer was, well, my goodness, just let your light shine. And, well, she wasn't quite satisfied with that. So finally, I said, well, does a light have to be told how to shine? You just take the bushel off, you see. Why, it's all right. It will reveal itself. Well, she came back that evening, and she came back with a joy, and she rushed up to me and she said, do you know that when I got home, why, that neighbor came right out the door and said, why, what has happened to you? And she said, I was able to tell her all about these things, you see. In other words, she hadn't had to do anything except be lighted. And to let the light shine, not to compel it to shine. So, he was a burning and a shining light. I certainly can't find this part, but it was where he said the only condemnation was that men preferred darkness rather than light. And I know that that is not going to be true of any of the folks here. And so, as we expose ourselves to the light of Christ, that light will burn within us. And then there will be no stopping the illumination of our entire world. It's been wonderful to be with you folks here, and remember you always. It sounds as though it's some kind of a farewell, but I think this is the last talk that I'll be making, and we'll have a wonderful time tomorrow morning. But let's just remember that we are brothers and sisters of the light.